I'm conservative, so I guess.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. But, it makes carriers flat people close too. Because I had that same person.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's Resiliency and Mitigation Council meeting. At this time, I would like to initiate the meeting, the public meeting. And to begin with, we're going to go ahead and start with attendance.
I've got Randy Chevalier. Laura Curtis,
Present.
Carmine DeBonis,
Just making the contributor.
Terry Edwards.
Here.
Jacob Emden,
Here.
Michael Newman,
Melody Coa is here on behalf of Michael Newman.
thank you. Jake Rhodes. Tom Savage,
Present.
Tom Torres,
Present. Daniel Hunnits over here for Tom Sawyer.
Maria Ayler. Present.
Perfect. And then I'm just going to proceed with a couple of reminders about our public meeting. First, this meeting is being recorded and broadcast online. The recording and associated material will be posted on the council's webpage. Comments in the chat will not be recorded, however. For council members online, please use the hand raise feature to speak. Except for the public comment periods, only council members online will be able to unmute themselves and turn on their camera. If public comments are taken, each speaker's time will be limited to provide everyone who wishes to comment the opportunity to do so. To comment, please fill out the speaking slip or the Google form if you are online. To begin today's meeting, we would like to start with the presentation from our friends at Forest Fire. And which I believe will be done fully online.
Yes. I see two of the members online and they've been made contributors. I'm not sure about the third.
And it's Dwayne Gibson, and I'm going to present for Fortress Fire, not Forest Fire, Fortress Fire. And Mike Odell is on with me. He's not in the same location, so he will be kind of a co-presenter on some technical aspects. You let me know when I should start?
You're free to begin.
Okay. First of all, thanks to all you on the commission and to the governor for initiating what looks to me like a very thorough review of the state of play related to fire and insurance and protecting homes and businesses as well. First of all, a bit about Fortress Fire. Fortress Fire is a technology company, and our technology has been developed by fire and modeling experts, wildfire and modeling experts, mathematicians, a whole bunch of other science and scientific-based people. Our company was formed up about 4 or 5 years ago, and the principal mission of the company is to understand how wildfire, interacts with homes, interacts with any structure, and when it does, figure out how that fire could get from the outside to the inside of the house and burn down the house. It also, our modeling system also understands and can, for any structure, understand how that fire not only migrates to the house, but what needs to be done to the house or the structure in order to stop it. Our model scores that, much like a credit score would score the ability of someone to pay back a loan, and therefore allows intelligent mitigation to be applied to the house. Sometimes when there's generalized mitigation standards that are prescribed in state law or by code, those general mitigation standards may or may not work depending on the home where it's located. So I'll be walking through this presentation. Should I just, do I click or do you?
We'll click, just let us know when to advance.
Okay, go ahead and advance. Okay, so I kind of covered some of this, but there are a whole range of different interests that we aim to serve. The chief among which is property owners, because they don't want their homes burning down. And if they only understood what they could actually do and what science tells them they should do to stop the house from burning down, they wouldn't lose all their stuff. We wouldn't have this issue that they're having in California now and Arizona potentially, and in other Western states that have dense forests. So what we want to do is we want to work for everybody: property owners, realtors who do these transactions, insurers, lenders who actually have the biggest interest at stake because it's their money. Their money's on the table, and they're thinking that their money is insured because there's homeowners insurance. But when the homeowners insurance is brought into question because the price of the homeowners insurance doubles or triples or goes even higher, the system, the banking system, the financial system, the lending system, they all start to break down a little bit. And Arizona is smart for doing what it's doing now, so that you don't end up in a situation like California with nearly 600,000 homes going into the FAIR plan with inferior insurance, and a bunch of people that will be left at the end of the day. If there's some massive fires out there, they'll be left with nothing because the banks will get paid off and there won't be enough insurance to cover their equity, a lot of them. So we recognize that problem and approach, we approach the issue of how to protect the home using our modeling system. You can go ahead and advance. So it's a huge problem, and one estimate that we found puts 97% of the Arizona population in counties with high or very high wildfire risk. So you guys are investigating solutions to an issue that's pretty important for your population in Arizona, your people in Arizona. It's not a unique issue in the West, but it certainly is a big issue. So our premise is that you need to really understand specific structures and understand all of the information that's available about those structures in order to build, like we have, a three-dimensional thermodynamic model that can tell everyone involved, starting with the homeowner, how to solve the problem that's burning down the hill. Okay? And as far as, and I've done this for probably, I've been in and around the fire industry since I was a staffer on Capitol Hill, starting about 35 years ago when I worked in this issue. And no one came to me while I was on the Hill or after the Hill until Fortress Fire came and said, look, we think we can actually solve the problem. But in order to solve the problem, you have to understand it for that specific structure. And so that's what we do. You can go ahead and advance. I'll let Mike Odell take this one and to explain the difference in these perils, the difference between the wildfire peril and other perils that cause harm. Because if you understand the difference between them, then you can best understand how to capture the wildfire peril as it relates to interaction with homes. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you all for spending the time focused on this problem, because this is a big problem, and we're quite pleased to be able to offer solutions. So as Dwayne was mentioning, so the data that you're looking at is FEMA data. These are inspections that FEMA does. It's a preliminary assessment that FEMA does when a governor submits an application for disaster relief. They go and they inspect structures and they give them a disposition. So they either give them a disposition of affected, minor damage, major damage, or destroyed. Obviously, there's going to be structures that are unaffected, no damage. Those aren't listed here because they don't actually track those. The point, I think, to understand here is that wildfire is a very different kind of peril from earthquake and hurricane, right? Earthquake and hurricane, you see there are, kind of the peak of the hump is in the affected minor, major sections, right? Destroyed and no damage are relatively, smaller portions, right? And it makes sense, wind will blow off some shingles, earthquake will maybe cause partial damage. Partial damage exists quite a bit in these other perils. The problem with wildfire is that once a structure starts to burn, it's more than likely to continue burning to destruction. So you see it's kind of an inverted distribution. You see large portions of structures that are destroyed, other portions of the structures are no damage, and very little in the middle, right? The nature of this problem requires a different approach to solving the problem, so we started kind of with this understanding that wildfire, the nature of the problem, is a very different kind of problem. And that we need to solve the problem, because otherwise you get a lot of destroyed structures, right? It's far more devastating. You don't get partial destruction. And so you can't actually do partial solutions. You have to solve the entire problem in order to solve the problem of wildfire.
Do you want me to take it back, Mike?
Sure.
All right. So in understanding what Mike just explained, what we do is we produce with our model a wildfire vulnerability score. How vulnerable is the structure to a wildfire? And in order to do that, you have to know how wildfires burn down houses. And there are only 5 ways a wildfire can burn down a house. And if it catches the house on fire, the house is going down. So there's radiant heat, there's convective heat, there's ember accumulation on the house, there's ember entry into the house through openings, vents and such, and there's structure to structure. When another structure is close enough that it will ignite the house by any of those means. Okay, so once you understand that, you can understand how to solve for each of those problems. So we segregate those problems in our report. You can go ahead and move the slide. And we score each of those vectors, they're called wildfire vectors. And we score them by vector. And you'll look here and you'll see each of the vectors is worth 100. And you want to score as low as possible. This particular example, scores, convective heat 41, radiant heat, and there's all of these factors are based upon the analysis that our model that fire scientists have produced, have built. And that model is three-dimensional. So it goes from the ground up, because a lot of times topography is a big deal. Are you built on the side of a mountain, or are you built in a valley, or are you built, or do you have big trees growing up around you? Because if you have big trees growing up around you, that can throw a lot of radiant heat at the roof of the house. We also, in understanding each of these vectors, we understand what the house is made out of, because the property records and other things that we have will tell us. We have all sorts of images, we have satellite information. There are a range of data sets that our company owns. And we own those data sets and we update those data sets because they're the fuel that feeds our model to be able to tell you how your house will burn down. And we produce a report behind this score, and it can be a very detailed report or it can be a summary report depending on the audience. But each of the fire vectors has an analysis behind it. We have a convective analysis, radiant analysis, etc. And they add up to make the score. You can go ahead and move the sheet. So once we determine that, the vulnerability score and the ignition risk vectors, our model defines cost-effective science-based mitigation actions to stop the structure from burning. Now, what does that mean? That means it's not a generalized cut everything down within 10 feet of the house. It's not, put a water system in. It's not anything generalized. It's all specific to that location and that house. Why? Because we've had the satellite images, the topography, the weather and climate information, what the structure's made out of. We know where the windows are because that's in the property records. And our model, once it scores these things, we can manipulate the structure with mitigation and rescore it. And you can almost rescore any structure down into the near zero category. There are things you can do, even if houses are close to each other. There are actions and mitigation that can be taken. Some of those things are proprietary to us because we've understood them first, so we have intellectual property on them. And you can take actions to prevent a fire in a neighborhood from burning down your house if you take them all. But you have to take them all. And the reason you have to take them all, as Mike said earlier, is if you miss one, the house is going to burn down, or at least could, more likely to burn down. You've got to stop all of them, and you've got to keep up with it too, meaning part of our program is a maintenance program to monitor and maintain the property in a condition where it won't burn. So we didn't just think this up and start trying it on our own. We have partnerships. And in California, we have a partnership with the California Association of Realtors. Why? Because their deals were getting torpedoed because someone would make an offer on a house, go and try to procure insurance, and the insurance would be 3 or 4 times the price, if they could get it, that it otherwise was. So the realtors had a problem, and we helped them to solve the problem. Again, we solve it with information and data and analysis in our model that is highly accurate. And we know it's highly accurate. How do we know it's highly accurate? It's highly accurate because we've back tested our model. We've back tested our model against fires in the past, 35 of them. And we ran our model given that there would be before the fire, because we had the images and we understood the homes, and we crunched all our data in to how will this, whether this will burn, and if so, how. And we produced in statistical terms what's called an F1 score, which is a measure of accuracy and repeatability of a model, of a prediction. And our F1 score, F1 scores are a number between 0 and 1. Our F1 score is over 0.9 in nearly every case, which means 90% of the time, what our model says is accurate. No one can claim that in any other case that I've heard of. So our report that goes to you has a 90% accuracy rate. You can go ahead and flip the slide. And so when we make the score and then show the predictions thereafter, or show the mitigations thereafter, and when those mitigations are done, the score will get lowered, and then you can have an intelligent conversation with your insurance company. And there are insurance companies that play ball on this. The sophisticated ones do, anyway. Some insurance companies don't like any change, and they'd rather just solve the problem by raising their rates because that's good for them. Not good for the property owner, not good for your governor's constituents, not good for you know, the public policy of saving houses. But you can save these houses, and you can save them if you have the information and the analysis that we bring. Mike, did you want to add anything to the issues about how these reports are prepared and their accuracy and that type of thing?
Sure, Dwayne. So, go ahead.
If I could interrupt you guys, I'm so sorry. We are running short on time. So Dwayne
Okay.
and Michael, if you'd allow me to open it up to the council to see if they have any questions thus far. And then I will also note for everyone online and in person, these slides will be available online. I believe they may already be. But for the moment, I'd like to open up for questions from the council.
I do have a quick question, Dwayne. We've seen a number of presentations from companies that provide similar services, but a lot of what comprises these scores seems to be proprietary, which is understandable. Is there any level of regulation or analysis around these models?
I think that not that I know of, and it would be a kind of a state by state thing. I know that California, for example, if you're going to use them for insurance purposes, you have to register them with the state and get them approved. I think I think the best way to address that issue, though, is the back testing. Because if you can back test a model and it's accurate, why wouldn't you want to use it?
Yeah,
Any questions?
yeah, I do.
Oh, sure.
So you mentioned that, you can use these scores to potentially get benefits to your premiums. Is this service available to property owners? So if I own a
Yes.
home, yeah,
Yes, if you, we can run it on any home. We have data for nearly all the homes in California. We have data for for a lot of homes in other states, including Arizona. And you can get it. It's not expensive at all. I mean, it's $150 for the assessment. It's called an aerial assessment. It's using all the existing data. Now, we can also go out to your house. We can see things on the ground that we may not have been able to see in the satellites, like where exactly are the windows, like what's under the eaves, that type of thing. And we can make the score even more accurate. So you can get a report, and you can argue yourself with your insurance company, or, you know, we help people do that a lot. And ultimately, the smart insurance companies are going to adopt some of them are starting, but they'll adopt this because it is the only solution out there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from any other council members? Online or in person?
I have a question.
Oh.
When you mentioned your partnership with the California Association of Realtors that you indicated has resulted in some positive results in
Yes.
California, have you engaged other realty associations in Arizona or other states?
You know, we have focused on California because the problem is huge there and it's imminent. And our partnership with the realtors has led to an optional line on the listing agreement and the offer agreement that would have a report that could be ordered for that particular home, so people will know. It's kind of, you've got to think of it too, like kind of a home inspection, although it's not an inspection, it's same type of thing. Some people choose to get a home inspection before they buy the house. And so this is on the California state forms now, our report. We have opened the door to other states, glad to open it to Arizona. When we were at the Insurance Commissioners Conference in November of last year, that's where we met one of your state legislators who told us that this was a serious problem in Arizona as well, and kind of led us into you all. So, you know, we enjoy opening the door to whoever in Arizona you wish to turn on to us, and we'll do the follow-up and talk to them. We do have some on our list now.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have another question, Dwayne Carmen.
Hi, good afternoon, Council. And not so much a question for Dwayne or Michael. I appreciate the presentation and seeing the tool that you all have developed. And I think for the Council, one of the thoughts on my mind, and it's not necessarily a question that needs to be answered now, as we continue to move forward and ultimately prepare materials, right, to submit after we conclude our efforts. One of the things that stands out to me is that there are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of programs, a lot of tools out there. They're built around a lot of the same principles. The methodologies that maybe are utilized in the program or the tool varies either slightly or possibly greatly. One of the things, though, that I think is at the crux of what we're facing in the state is, how do we provide homeowners with the ability to accurately and reliably determine what the risk is, and to have the insurance companies recognize the information that they're utilizing? In other words, right, if a particular insurance company favors one tool over the other, and a property owner independently finds a program or a tool to do an assessment and then presents that, it may not result in the insurance company recognizing the work that was done. So how can this council be of assistance in sort of honing in on what is the set of tools that are utilized that not only help the homeowner understand what their risk is, but gets acknowledged by the insurance company, and in more of a collaborative way, then they chart a course to mitigate for that risk and therefore maintain some reasonable insurance rate, and also make sure that the home is best situated, right, for avoidance of total destruction. And so that keeps coming up for me every time that we get together, and I'm very appreciative of all of the experts and the program operators and developers of these tools. It's just, how do we make progress towards something that is useful both for homeowners and the insurance industries to get sort of on a common footing. So I'll just mute again, and if there's any follow-up conversation, I'll listen. Thank you.
Carmen, I can address that a little bit, and I think you raise an exceptionally good point, because your point is about action. How do you take action, and how do you know what your the veracity of what I'm saying versus what other people are saying, and how does that arrive in policy, right? Public policy. That is a longer discussion. And I've worked in this area in public policy literally for 30, going on 40 years now, okay? I'd love to have that discussion with you, because I've got 15 ways right now we could talk about, and each of them would take some time. So to the extent that you guys want to have that discussion, I am happy to spend as much time as you want, because it excites me to be able to solve a problem for a state that's not at a point like California is in crisis on insurance. And if Arizona, is just around the corner, my mom lives in Arizona. My brother lives in Arizona. I've got family there. And so I know your state. And that's why I was very excited when Lori invited us to attend this thing. But I'd love to have that conversation. If we could do it, arrange it, and I'm there.
Okay, well, and thank you so much, Dwayne and Michael, for your presentation. My apologies for the Freudian slip earlier. It is Fortress Fire, not Forest Fire. But I do appreciate it, and I look forward to looking at the rest of your slides after the meeting. So right now, I would like to welcome our next speaker from Moody's Corporation. Matthew, if you could introduce yourself and please proceed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak with you all today. So my name is Matthew Nielsen, and I'm actually a 20-year veteran of the catastrophe modeling space. I actually started right during Hurricane Katrina, and I'm a meteorologist by background. I have been involved with the creation of all of our various climate hazard peril models for things like hurricanes, hailstorms, flooding, and most recently wildfire. So what I'd like to do today is just give a very quick overview of how our models work. What are the different components? What goes into creating a model? And where I'd like to start is talking a little bit about who we are and how our models are used by the industry. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to set a baseline that, Moody's itself has been in existence for over 100 years. I'm sure most people are familiar with Moody's from our ratings, which is a whole totally separate division from where I sit within the analytical group. But RMS was the original catastrophe modeling company that became part of Moody's back in 2021. But we got our start modeling earthquakes back in 1987 in California as sort of a joint venture between Stanford University, some of the professors there, and some of the students. But our goal really is to take what is a couple of different disciplines. We've talked about physical science, with Dwayne and Michael. I'm thinking about What are those factors that cause a fire? But we're also looking at engineering, similar to how they do, but blending that with actuarial science, computer technology, and data science. And that's led us to create models for various perils all over the world. So I want to jump right into it. Let's go to the next slide and just sort of set the stage for what it is that we're trying to solve with catastrophe models. And ultimately, this is all about trying to answer the problem of, if you're an insurance company, you need to know how to do two things right off the bat. One is you need to understand how much money you need to have on hand in order to pay out claims. And you also need to understand how you should develop pricing to make sure that you get to that first goal. And so actuaries within these companies, they're the ones charged with coming up with and calculating the risk to an insurance company portfolio. What are the tools that they have to do that? Typically, before catastrophe models, it was all history-based. So for wildfire, you might be able to go back into the historical data and look at things like burn areas or historical ignitions or other pieces of information. And for industry loss data, you might get some information from some of the large data companies that will look at total losses. But if you're an individual insurance company, you're probably not going to have those individual location level losses. So for that reason, we see history as being very incomplete. And it's not a great guide for us to figure out how to go forward as an insurance company, if I'm playing that role now, and build out a portfolio. This is why we use catastrophe models, because they're meant to take what is a very limited historical set of information and build that out into, instead of 50 to 100 years of historical information, to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of potential year simulations of what could happen in 2025. Let's move to the next slide. There's a couple of different applications that our models are used for in the insurance industry. Most basically, I would say portfolio management. That's the one that's been around since the very beginning. And this is really where insurers are trying to understand what's driving the risk to their portfolios, how can they analyze that capital adequacy, what they need to have on hand to pay out their claims, and then also try to assess how much they need to be able to mobilize their capital during a real-time event. I would say about 15 to 20 years ago, models really hit their renaissance when it came to being used in risk transfer. So companies will use this to help them understand what their reinsurance needs might be, how they can structure and price those contracts. And it's a good way for folks to be able to look at risk on the same basis. And what I mean by that is, if you are a reinsurance company, you can understand the risk for an Arizona wildfire on the same basis that maybe you could for a hurricane in Florida. You can sort of talk the same language. Now, more recently, models really got into underwriting just because it took that long for the technology to develop so that models can be looking at individual locations, similar to what Michael and Dwayne are talking about. We need to be able to understand all the way down to the individual homeowner level to be able to suss out the risk. So models are used to help analyze different policy structures, usually more for more complex risks like industrial or commercial. You can differentiate risks, and I think what's really important here is being able to take some of those home hardening features that we were talking about and putting a price to that. So if you are adding some of those mitigation features to your home, what does that do in terms of the overall rate or insurance indication? They're also helped directly to inform some of those loss costs that are used in ratings. I don't want to say that our models are used directly in rating, because certainly there are other factors that are being used by insurance companies, but it is a component. It is an input and can be an input to that. So let's go to the next slide. And I want to start talking about the risk, and I'm going to start sort of breaking apart models here. But ultimately, this is a really dynamic risk from the sense that you have elements in the natural, the built, and the human environments that are changing. So it's not that we can go back and look at history and use that to project forward, because history is not necessarily a good guide for how things are changing. And for the natural environment, we need to understand what's happening with climate, local weather, topography, land usage, fuels. For the built environment, we want to understand how densely spaced structures are in neighborhoods. We want to understand the building materials that are being used, the connective fuels. So if you're thinking about fences going in between houses, those are connective fuels, and the infrastructure. And then finally, for the human piece, it's understanding what mitigation has been put into place, not just at the homeowner level, but also the community level, what the ignition sources are likely to be, and fire intervention and suppression. So there's a lot of things at play here. And let's go ahead and move into the next slide, and we'll start talking more about modeling. So the way that I like to think about modeling is looking at these 5 different modules. So in the first one, the stochastic event module, this is where we're trying to simulate a bunch of different wildfire scenarios. And by a bunch, I mean, again, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of years of simulation events. And this is where we're going to look at where are the events occurring, how big are those events, how frequent are those events. Then we move into the hazard module, where for each of those simulated wildfires, we want to understand the spatial extent and intensities of the radiant heat, of the embers, and the smoke hazards. So that'll give us our footprint of the wildfire itself. Then in the middle, this is where we start to marry that with the exposure. And by exposure here, meaning the properties that are within an insurance portfolio. So what are all of the different properties? How are they constructed? What are the insurance terms on those properties and coverages? And from there, we move into vulnerability, where for each one of those locations in a portfolio, for every single one of those simulated events, how vulnerable are the structures that exist? And how vulnerable are they based on all of the different characteristics of those locations? And I'll show a little bit more in just a moment about what those characteristics are. But what we come out with at the end of that vulnerability module are mean damage ratios for each one of those simulated events for each location. And given that mean damage, we can calculate the insurance loss in the financial analysis module. And that's the very high level view of how models are created. You can use this same framework for any other peril, and it works just the same. So let's move to the next slide, where basically this breaks those first 2 components down into a bit more fine level resolution. So in order to be able to model these simulated fires, we want to be able to first understand what does the landscape look like, because that's going to tell us what fuels are available to burn, how far those fuels are from the homes, and information about topography, as we know that fires tend to have different movements as we talk about them going up slopes or down slopes. And then the second component here, once we sort of know what the lay of the land is, we need to be able to simulate where we think it is favorable for fire weather to occur. So we create hundreds of thousands of different simulations looking at the most important factors for fire weather, which are obviously going to be wind speed, it's going to be humidity, and it's going to be temperature. So we can look at what those fire weather factors have been over some historical period and resample that to come up with new years, new fire weather years and simulations that again tell us where those areas are that are most favorable. Then we get into fire ignitions, and this one's really interesting because we go back and we look at historical fire ignitions, and 84% of those ignitions are human caused. And what's interesting about that is, I mean, they come from a variety of different places, whether it comes from, transmission lines, whether it's coming from campfires, arson, all of these other features. Besides those 84% human caused ignitions, we look at other things like lightning, for example. But what helps us with the ignitions and what's interesting is looking at where you have those interactions between humans and the wildland areas. So it's going to be looking at roads. It's going to be looking at where campsites are. Things like that will tend to find a higher level of ignition. Then once we've ignited the fire, we need to simulate how that fire will move through the environment. And that's going to be based on some physics within our model about how that fire is going to burn those fuels, but also about the wind speed and direction, how that's pushing a fire in a particular area. Another component of that that's extremely important is embers. That was mentioned in the previous presentation about how embers can be one cause, and that can actually start fires ahead of where that flaming front is. When that happens to go into neighborhoods, as we saw recently in those January fires in California, that can cause something called urban conflagration, where you have fires going from wildland spread to structure spread. And that requires a sort of a separate module to be able to look at that. And then finally, we have smoke. And so even if you aren't necessarily experiencing damage directly to your property from the burn, we do note that smoke can cause claims. And so we have a smoke emission and spread model that looks at how areas within a certain perimeter from a fire can be impacted. So let's jump to the next slide. And basically here, we're looking at those fire spread components. So what the model is going to do is it's going to create a footprint that looks somewhat like we see on the left, where it has this burned area that emanates out of an ignition point. And then you have the blue area, which is basically signifying the winds and how that fire is being spread. We have the middle part, which is spotting. So that's telling us, hey, there are embers going in front of this particular flaming front, and that could be causing spot fires downwind. But there's also fire suppression. And so we need to take that into account and understand what are the elements about a neighborhood that make it easier for fire trucks and other fire suppression methods to get in and start to help during these fires. So let's move to the next slide. And I wanted to just zoom in on ember intensity for a moment, because this is a really important one. And this is going to be extremely important when talking about the fragility and vulnerability of structures, where we've seen in some of these historical fires, that embers can travel up to 2 miles downstream. And so you can see in this picture, you have this red line here on the left, which is signifying where the actual flames and flaming front of the fire got to. And you'll see some of those homes in the satellite image that were burned. But then you have the circles in the upper right-hand side that signify a couple of homes that burned that weren't necessarily right next to the flaming front. And that's because you would have embers that are flying in front of that burned area on the lower left. They will catch in vents, gutters, and grooves in the roofing, accumulate, enter the building, and cause fires and conflagration. So it's really important to be able to model those ember transports from fires to see how that spotting is going to happen downstream. Let's go to the next slide now. One thing that happens, and this is where we see the most expensive fires occur, is when you have those embers going into built up areas. And this is an example from 2017 in the Tubbs fire in Northern California, where we saw urban conflagration. And by that meaning that we had areas of wildfire that went from the wildland, more rural areas into neighborhoods, and was causing structure-to-structure fire. And these are just some examples of looking at ember footprints that our model produced, a couple of different samples from fires that are like the one we saw in Tubbs. And you can see Coffee Park, this little black area in the bottom part of the screen here. And if you go to the next slide, it's an actual picture of Coffee Park. This neighborhood actually burned down in about 90 minutes. And it was 2 miles from the flaming front, meaning that the embers traveled 2 miles across a major freeway into this neighborhood, caught houses on fire. And because you had connected fuels, meaning that you had fences and other things connecting all of these structures together, and they were so densely situated that this house-to-house spread initiated, and you had an urban conflagration. We saw a very similar thing happen in LA for both the Eaton and the Palisades fire as well. So let's jump to the next slide. So just briefly, I wanted to show an example of how we do smoke modeling, where you can see that we start with whatever we built up for our simulated fire footprint. We have transmission models that look at once the smoke has entered the atmosphere, how it's carried downstream, and how concentrated it will be for certain areas. And that's important, again, because smoke can enter the home, even if it's not being burnt, and cause damage. And in fact, in the next slide, there's a picture that was from our most recent reconnaissance in Los Angeles. And you'll see that the house actually was not burned in this instance, but you'll see carpet, you see a mattress, you'll see other pieces of furniture that once those are contaminated, they have to be thrown away, and that can cause an insurance claim. And in some fires, the smoke claims can be up to 20% of the overall event loss. So in the last few minutes, we'll go to the next slide. I just want to briefly go through the vulnerability part of our model, because this is extremely important when it comes to thinking about the things that Dwayne and Michael were talking about just before me, and how do you get those into a model? So we actually sit on a board of the Insurance Institute for Building and Home Safety, or IBHS, and they do a lot of research on wildfires. And certainly we work with other institutions, but they have some very simple graphics about things that are helpful for your house, things like closing your eaves, having wood-resistant siding, dual pane windows, flame retardant materials for the yard. So looking at rock versus like wood chips, and decking. And so not only do they look at all of this in sort of a research setting, but I think if you advance one more, you'll see that they actually built this structure and they tested it in the laboratory that they have in South Carolina. They've got a full-scale lab, and they do testing for wind, they do it for hail, and they do it for fire. And you can see here, this is that actual structure from that previous slide, where you have the mitigated structure on the right and the unmitigated on the left. And they have ember cannons that are throwing embers at these locations. And you'll see that the location on the left ignited in several different places, and the one on the right is still safe for the time being. Let's go to the next slide. So what we do in our model is to represent each of the locations in a portfolio. There's 3 sets of information that we ask insurers to provide. The first being site hazard data, which the model will have this pre-populated, but this is where if you know that you've done clearing of vegetation around your location, and you can enter that directly into the model. If you know that there's different vegetation, you've replaced that, you can enter that into the model. There's primary information, so this is going to be all of the sort of more COPE-like data. So it's going to be occupancy, it's going to be construction, is it wood frame, is it masonry, the number of stories, the year built to look at the building codes, and the floor area. And then it has all of these what we call secondary modifiers, and these are going to be more important when thinking about mitigation. So it's going to be looking at the roof characteristics. Do you have the ember accumulators? Do you have suppression? All of those different things, those elements that go into mitigation. In fact, for IBHS, they have what they call fortified designations, and our model will actually take that as an input to say, okay, yes, you've done all of these things together, therefore we're going to give you a certain amount of credit. But that's where insurers, when they're modeling, they would enter that information in. So I think it's important, as I think we were talking about here earlier, to make sure that as a homeowner, you talk to the insurance carrier to say, first off, what are those things that you are offering a discount for, and that the insurance company is very clear about what those are. And then I would say, secondly, to ensure that once you have done any of those home hardening methods, you go back to your insurance company and you make sure that they're aware of what you've done and show the evidence of those improvements. Let's go to the next slide. One example I wanted to show is that we've done some of this modeling directly with communities. There's an example paper we have out there for what's called the Tahoe Donner Homeowners Association. It's an area in Northern California where we did a modeling exercise, and we looked at how they had done community level mitigation, and it reduced the overall average annual loss for homeowners anywhere between 21 and 59%. So that would be akin to like their premium. And they did that through a couple of the methods that you can see listed here. But they were also able to look at the overall homeowners association insurance premium, and the fact that not only did the premium go down by about 40%, but it lowered the deductible that they had by about 89%. And so, if you want to go back, you can look at this slide after this meeting and search for this paper, and it's available out there to the public. And it's a really, I think, compelling report about how this stuff is working in real time. Let's go to the next slide. The other thing I wanted to mention, I think it's important for Arizona is that I know that there are a couple of different community level preparedness and mitigation programs. So we reflect Firewise. That's one of the ones that we have in our model. We try to reflect wherever there are community mitigation efforts. So you can see in the map down Arizona, you've got areas in the southern central part of the state that are part of that designation. That is part of the model. So if a new community gets a designation, the model has a way for that to be reflected in real time. And so we want to make sure that we're able to provide that as we know that this is very dynamic. Go to the next slide. So similar to what Dwayne and Michael were talking about in terms of going back and validating their approach, looking at testing against historical information, we do that same thing where we do have historical fires, particularly for where we have claims from insurance companies, so we can understand what the claiming process was like, what the actual method of ignition is, where we can find it, and how fires propagated. So we have a bunch for California, but we also have Oregon, Colorado, Hawaii from some of the more recent fires. But we look at information, whether it be burn area, other historical information about losses. We'll do that for every single state. So we have stuff that is Arizona specific. We're looking at Arizona specific topography, landscape, fuel types, all of those things, building codes, all of those will be in effect. Let's go to the next slide. And certainly we don't do any of this work in a vacuum. So we're working with like the Forest Service. In California, we work with CAL FIRE. I mentioned the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And we also have some insurance carriers as part of our development partners, because we find that using and looking at and examining some of their real-time data is extremely helpful. And that helps give us, again, information we can use to validate and calibrate our models. Let's go to the next slide. Finally, I just wanted to say that we do send folks out into the field after events. And it's important to look at some of the things that they find. So for example, on the lower left here, you'll see that there's a double pane window on this structure where in this particular fire, the outer pane was compromised, but because it was double pane, it protected the inner pane, and therefore you didn't have embers or heat or flames entering the structure, and that helped to save that particular building. Conversely, on the upper right-hand side, you do see some decking material and vegetation and other flammable objects that went up in this example. But also in the lower right, it is possible, and you can see this from the bar charts that were shown in the previous presentation, that yes, most wildfires are going to burn the entirety of a structure, but it is possible to get just some damage. It's not very common, but it does happen. And so we do model locations that do tend to have partial damage. And then I think if you go to the next, that's the end of the prepared remarks. So there's just some information about our model and what we provide and what's part of the scope. And I just want to answer ahead of time one of the questions that was brought up before. So in terms of where our model goes through review, California, as was mentioned, is a state that as of this year, they have a model review process. So if you are planning to use a model for rate making, it has to be go through a review by what's called the model advisor that works within CDI. And that's going through and providing information about all of the things that I mentioned here today in much greater detail in order for them to make a determination that they think this is accurate and reliable. We do the same thing in Florida for both hurricane and flood. In fact, that's the reason I'm unfortunately not able to be there in person today, is I'm here in Tallahassee, Florida, because we're having our hurricane model reviewed tomorrow by the Hurricane Commission. So there's a lot of review and scrutiny that goes into these models. There's a lot of materials that we have that help understand validation and calibration of models as well. And so I know that was a lot of information. I wanted to try to get through it in 30 minutes, and I apologize for talking so quickly. But I'm hoping that this is just one step towards trying to understand all the things that go into catastrophe models. And as always, I'm happy to have continuing conversations. I hope this isn't the last time I talk to all of you about what we do and all of the information that goes into building these simulations. So I'll go ahead and stop and take questions there. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Do any of the council members here?
I have a quick question, Matthew.
Sure.
And if you're not able to answer this, that's totally fine. It seems to me that the level of knowledge you'd probably need to assess a model like this is probably very substantial. You mentioned that you guys have gone through the process in California and Florida. We'd heard that from some other companies who offer something similar. If you're able to answer this, do you find that to be a worthwhile process? A model review? And
Yeah, I think if you set a review up in such a way that, you know, before you build out all of these standards and requirements, if you understand what it is that, you know, as a regulator, as somebody who's an interested party, what it is you actually want to see from the model to help you get to feeling comfortable, I think that's important. And why I say that is because California, I think, you know, this process is going to change after this year. And I say that because it was put together very, very quickly, and they sort of copied what Florida had done. And I think as we're going through the process, they're realizing some things are more important than others. So I imagine that's going to change. But one thing I will offer is that we do collaborate with the NAIC. And through that collaboration, there's a ton of documentation about our models that is available to anybody working at a state regulator. So if you're part of the insurance regulation team, you can actually send a request to the NAIC and say, hey, I'd really like to understand more about Moody's. Can I be a part of this data sharing agreement? They'll send you access to a SharePoint site, and you can look at all the documentation that we provide to our clients. And I think that's always a very helpful first step, just to get a sense for what it is you think you want to know about models in order to feel like you have a good feeling about their accuracy and their reliability.
to that point, has anyone ever done something where, because I kind of acknowledge that it seems like the people who are able to access these are either the regulators, the people who are directly involved in making them, and sometimes it's not available to policy holders or homeowners. Has there ever been an attempt to just take one property and see the variety of scores different models give it?
Actually, so there's a couple of different like test cases that are run in those model evaluation programs. So California and Florida, they usually come up with either a notional portfolio or they might throw a couple locations and say, here's an example. We want to see how different models look at that. I think, that could be a worthwhile exercise if you wanted to say, hey, modelers, we're going to give you a sample location. We want to see what that looks like coming out of your model. I think that's certainly an appropriate question to ask.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the room? How about online for our council members? Any questions? Okay. Matthew, thank you very much. And for everyone, the slides are available online or will be after the presentation.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. Our next presentation is from National Ready Mix Concrete Association. And Shameen, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can. If you want to introduce yourself, and please proceed.
Thank you very much. My name is Shamim Rashid Sumar. I'm a fire protection engineer by profession, and I work for the National Ready Mix Concrete Association. I lead our codes and standards department, and I'm also an advocate for non-combustible and fire-resistant construction. So I want to thank the council for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to be giving sort of an intro to resiliency, which is kind of a primer to the concept. And this is a presentation that we normally give to the AEC community to kind of communicate a sense of why resiliency should be an important consideration beyond minimum code requirements, and provide you with a sense of scale to the impact of natural disasters that they pose to our society, with a bit of a focus on fire. Next slide, please. So I know we're short on time. Normally this is like an hour-long presentation, but I'm going to, it's going to be a bit abridged. I'll go through some of the slides very quickly and hit the highlights. We will talk about fire, its impact, and briefly on other disasters. look at what the definition of resilience is. What are the steps to disaster resilience? How do we quantify the benefits of resilient construction? I do have a number of case studies. Hopefully we'll have time to hit one of them that I think is interesting before opening it up to questions. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the impact of natural disasters. Next slide. And for millions of people, the consequences of natural disasters have become very real. In 2024, there were 27 separate weather and climate disaster events that were considered billion-dollar events. So they had losses that were at least $1 billion or more. And last year was also the 10th consecutive year in which there were 10 or more of those billion-dollar disaster events. And a lot of the data I'll be sharing with you is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I've included the links there. Next slide, please. And so the last 10 years have been costly. Last year was not an exception, but 2017 was the costliest year on record. And that came with a price tag of over $305 billion worth of damage from disasters. And that was the year that, if you remember, Hurricane Harvey broke a rainfall record for a single tropical storm event, had more than 4 feet of rain in Southeast Texas. That was also the year that Puerto Rico experienced Hurricane Maria. So that, and there were many other events that we'll talk about later in the presentation specific to 2017 that made it the most costly. Next slide, please. So when we talk about wildfires, these are some statistics. 4.5 million U.S. homes are at risk or high risk or extreme risk of wildfire. Almost half of those are in the state of California. And I mentioned 2017, that was the worst year on record previous to this and last year, with $17 billion worth of loss. And that loss number is considered that it will just increase as time goes on. Next slide, please. And so here, the damage that's caused by wildfire is only going to increase because we continue to build in fire-prone areas. And I noted a couple of articles here. One is called "Why is California Rebuilding in Fire Country? Because You're Paying for It." And typically what's happening, sometimes there are policies that prohibit increase in rates, even in wildfire-prone areas, which means that cost is just being passed on to other homeowners who may not even be in wildfire-prone areas. Next slide, please. And so I mentioned California. Wildfire is, as you know, not just a California problem. This is a map from forests and rangelands. And you will notice the high risk area for wildfire is in orange, and it's covering a majority of the United States. It's covering, the western half, and it's covering most of the southern half. So not just the California problem. Next slide, please. And this slide has a few more statistics. Structure fires, whether they're caused by accident, arson, or wildfire, they result in significant loss of life and property each year. And I've got some statistics from NFPA here. Fire kills more Americans than all natural disasters combined. Next slide, please. And so a lot of that damage is due to the materials that we're constructing out of. Developers have increased the use of combustible wood frame construction, and that is noted as a primary reason for some of the losses. Next slide, please. And so I have a couple more slides on data, which I pulled from NOAA, just showing you that, again, the number of billion-dollar disaster events each year is trending upward. And then next slide, the cost of those, if you look at the trend line, is also increasing. Next slide. So when we talk about resilience, I like to start with the definition of resilience, and there's many definitions. The Urban Land Institute defines resilience as the ability to prepare and plan for, absorb, and recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. So that's one of my favorite definitions. And resilience is about social well-being, economic development, but also environmental sustainability. So we have to include all of those things in our discussion of resilience. Next slide, please. And I like to use this sort of graph that was developed by the U.S. Resiliency Council to kind of describe what resilience means in time. So if you look at the orange curve on this graph, this is representing a, let's say, building that has not taken any attempts to incorporate resilience measures. So you have, functionality. You get to that dashed line, there's some disaster event. The functionality of that building has decreased. There are repairs that are required over a length of time. And once those repairs are completed, you're back to your functionality of the building. But if we look at the yellow line and think that that represents a design or a building where some resilience measures have been taken, there's mitigation that is provided. When you get to that disaster event, you have a little bit of a cushion. So you don't have quite the same loss of functionality. The repairs are less. The time to make those repairs are less. And you get back to functionality much quicker. Next slide, please. And this is just another way to look at resilience, but in the context of sustainability. If we identify resiliency not just as a state of preparedness for a disaster, but also the characteristic really of a sustainable society where you have more control over human needs, basic human needs like shelter, food, water, energy, communications, commerce, then we can see that relationship between resilience and sustainability. You can't have one without the other. My favorite line is a building that burns down is not particularly sustainable. Next slide, please. And this is just another way to look at it. If for those that are designers, you might have prescriptive design, which is kind of looking at construction phase only, very capitally intensive and dealing with individual buildings. Performance-based design does start to look at damage and recovery and advanced analysis, still looking at individual buildings. But when we're looking at resilience-based design, it's looking at the complete life cycle of a building. It does account for safety, damage, recovery, not looking at just construction phase, but looking at spreading costs along the life cycle. So operations, reserves, and it's not just looking at a single building, but a portfolio or community of buildings and looking at a comprehensive resilience framework. Next slide, please. So hopefully I gave you an idea of what are some ways to look at resilience. Now we're going to look at steps to disaster resilience. Next slide, please. And we recommend 4 steps to disaster resilience, some being mandatory and some being voluntary. The first step really is to adopt updated building codes, look at adopting higher performance building standards, incentivizing disaster resilient construction, and then finally building with more robust materials. Next slide, please. So when I talk about adopting updated building codes, there are a few sort of perceptions that if you're building today, or if you're entering a building today, it's a new code compliant building will be resilient against considerable damage after a major hazard event. That might not necessarily be true depending on when the building was constructed and what code it was constructed to. So we know that codes are on continuous cycles, and different jurisdictions will adopt different versions of model building codes. So the first line of defense is really to maintain current in the jurisdiction and adopt the most recent building codes, not have a lag of 6 to 10 years. There are some jurisdictions in the United States that are still adopting 2015 codes or even 2012 codes, which puts them 10 years behind the most current version of the code. Next slide, please. And then once you have adopted a current edition of the building code, there are high performance building standards that you can consider to go beyond those minimum code requirements. Remember that, when you're building to code, legally you're building to the worst possible building that you can legally build to. So going beyond that is really where we're starting to see some results for resilience. So we advocate for looking at enhanced building codes and standards, also standards developed by IBHS, the Fortified for Safer Living and Safer Business, building to rating systems such as the USRC, US Resiliency Council, the READY or the RELY systems, which we'll talk about. Next slide, please. So if I talk about enhanced building codes or standards, one example is this Appendix N from the state of Georgia. So that is looking at an appendix that is looking at building more resilient. So after the damaging windstorms that Georgia experienced in 2008, they created this disaster resilient building construction appendix to the IBC and IRC, which is offering affordable, flexible approaches to improving resiliency at the local level. Next slide, please. And then here I've listed some standards that are under development by the International Code Council. These are part of a suite of resilience standards for residential construction. The first one, ICC 600, is for residential construction in high wind regions. That was developed in 2020. And currently the 605 standard is under development, which is the standard for residential construction in regions with wildfire hazard. And that has resilient building approaches for residential construction to have more resistance to wildfire. And then there are future standards for other hazards, such as tsunami, etc. Next slide, please. And then I believe IBHS was mentioned. IBHS has the Fortified Standards, which is a program with enhanced design criteria, more enhanced relative to code minimums. And as you know, IBHS is a not-for-profit applied research organization that is supported by the insurance industry. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk very briefly about the USRC standard. This is a rating system that rates buildings along the dimensions of safety, damage, which is expressed as repair cost, recovery expressed as time to regain basic function. So you can have your building rated by the US Resiliency Council, bronze, silver, gold, and based on your rating, it basically means you've taken certain mitigation factors into your design and construction. Next slide, please. And then the READY rating system, that's specific to seismic design. That's a specific set of performance criteria that's based on modified FEMA P58 loss assessment. And then the RELY standard is a point-based system that's adopted by the USGBC, and it has many LEED-centric credits. If you're familiar with version 5 of LEED, resilience is now a prerequisite before you can claim credits for sustainability. Next slide, please. So more voluntary means for promoting resilience are to incentivize disaster resilient construction. And again, I have some statistics here from Munich Re. Next slide, please. There are many ways to incentivize disaster resilient construction. I mentioned IBHS's programs. One of them is Fortified Framework, which is available for home as well as for commercial properties. And there are many states that have enacted laws where states are required to lower the cost of property insurance for buildings that have been designed and constructed to the IBHS Fortified standard. Next slide, please. And then there are a whole host of other incentives that can be offered: building permit rebates for more resilient designs, property tax reductions, allowing accelerated local permitting and inspection procedures for resilient properties, providing zone benefits, either higher density or height bonuses, allowing more favorable developer agreements for the construction of resilient properties, and revolving loan programs. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about the fourth strategy, which is building with robust materials. So increasing fire resistance of building elements reduces the amount of damage that will occur to a building and its contents in fire. The additional benefits of enhanced life safety also mean less demand on community resources, especially for emergency response and facilities that are then able to be more adaptable for reuse. And so I have a few slides talking about what some of those strategies for building with robust materials might look like. And obviously I work for the concrete industry. Next slide, please. And concrete buildings are especially suited to provide resistance to natural disasters. I've got a quote here from the president of Flash. Concrete homes, she says, are ideal for withstanding extreme weather. So they have necessary hardness, stiffness, mass to resist high winds, flying debris from tornadoes and hurricanes. Concrete, as you know, is also fire resistant, non-flammable. So that means that concrete buildings will not contribute to spread of fire and will provide containment of fires. And then there are other benefits, seismic benefits. Also, concrete does not rot or rust, even if it is subject to flooding. And I have a picture here of tilt-up concrete wall system. Next slide. Another strategy that we use is building with insulating concrete forms. This is a very popular construction type for not only residential, but commercial properties as well. This is a type of construction where concrete is poured between two layers of EPS insulation. So the EPS is actually sold as an ICF block connected by cross ties. Those blocks are stacked and then the concrete is poured. This is actually a fire resistant methodology for construction, and it also provides insulation, so it has energy and sustainability benefits as well. Next slide, please. I'll go very quickly through quantifying the benefits of resilient construction. Next slide. And that's because there's a perception that building to a higher standard potentially adds cost, both for an owner to accept that higher initial cost and for other stakeholders. You have to have some convincing evidence of long-term savings. So we'll go through some of these studies here that I've mentioned on this slide. Next slide, please. So the Urban Land Institute has a report entitled Returns on Resilience, the Business Case, and it explores economic benefits of resilient construction. And it has some detailed case studies where they actually look at the cost savings that they had from implementing resilient strategies. And in all cases, they were able to demonstrate a justification for spending more upfront to the design and building of resilient structures. Next slide, please.
Shami?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, we do have one more presentation.
Okay.
So 5 more minutes, if that's okay.
Yeah, I can wrap up in 5 minutes. So the other study that I wanted to highlight was the NRMCA insurance cost study. So my organization back in 2017 undertook a research study to see if insurance companies offered lower insurance rates for structures that were built using non-combustible materials, both for builder's risk and commercial property insurance. Next slide, please. And so that study looked at 5 city reference buildings in 5 cities. They interviewed insurance agents and looked at what the quotes were for a concrete building versus a timber building. And the study revealed that insurers were aware of the risks of building with combustible construction, and they were charging higher premiums for combustible construction. Next slide, please. And we did a refresh of this in 2023, just a couple of years ago, to see if some of those trends were still there, and you can actually download that report. And we did see that the quotes for that same 4-story apartment reference building, once again, they were consistently confirming that the cost of building insurance for a typical apartment building is lower when that building is constructed with concrete instead of wood frame. And that gap, the difference between those two rates seems to be trending, increasing as well. Next slide, I'll ask you to skip through. There's a number of reports, next slide please, that show that if you do invest in resilience, you do get a benefit, you do get a return on that investment. If I can ask you to skip forward to the case studies, which is 3 or 4 slides. Right here. So I do have one case study that I want to share. Next slide, please. And this is from an explosion that occurred in New York City. There was a gas explosion in East Harlem in 2014 that actually destroyed 2 apartment buildings. Neighboring properties had to be vacated because there was a lot of debris from that explosion, and it actually shattered windows in buildings blocks away. There were 8 fatalities, many injuries, 100 displaced families, massive fire service and emergency service response as well. This explosion made the news because the local utility was found responsible for the explosion, which was over $150 million worth of damage. But the news story here for us is that I mentioned insulated concrete form construction. There was an ICF concrete building that survived the blast and was reopened after the explosion and fire, after those repairs were made. Next slide, please. So this is some pictures. The left side is before the explosion. So if you see the building that I think is called Spanish Christian, that's where the explosion took place. And the building right next to that is the ICF building that I'm talking about. So if you look in the middle picture, that is, I think the day of or the day after the explosion. That middle building, as I said, it exploded, and the building to the left is an ICF building. And you can see that it is still standing in 2015. So the New York Department of Buildings noted miraculously that that building did survive, even though it was inches from that building that exploded and had a fire. There was some repairs that had to be made. I mentioned that there was a lot of debris from that explosion, which did penetrate the roof of the ICF building. And so when the fire service came, when the water was applied for fire services, for the firefighting, some of that water did enter into the building. So there was some water damage, and that's why there was some repairs, minimal repairs that had to be made before the building was reopened. Next slide, please. I keep this case study only to explain why that building survived after explosion. We did do some testing of ICF buildings, some blast resistant testing with the military, and we found that in the testing, the ICF actually cushions the explosion, protecting the concrete. So we know from that testing and the actual case study of that explosion and fire that it's a really good strategy, both for explosion and fire. Next slide, please. And there are a number of case studies that show buildings in neighborhoods where wildfire has come through, and there'll be this lone building standing, even though all of the buildings next to it have been destructed. This one in particular, if you remember the presentation before me about some of the features of non-combustible cladding or siding, Class A roof, double pane glass windows, landscaping that includes sort of a defensible space, all of those, including as well as building with more robust materials, are why this particular building survived when all the homes next to it did not. And you'll see other case studies with very similar events happening. Next slide, please. So just in conclusion, obviously there are increased risks that are posed to us from natural hazards, including fire. Resilient construction can address those risks by addressing asset protection and building functionality in addition to life safety. There's a number of approaches to mitigating the effect of those hazards. I talked about adopting updated building codes, using high performance standards, incentivizing disaster resilient construction, and building with more robust materials. Next slide, please. and happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Shameen. And I think that in my effort to allow our fourth presenter some time, if the council members can maybe hold questions till the end. Thank you so much for your presentation. And again, her slides will be available online as well. Brian joins us from Zesty AI. If you would like, please to start your presentation.
Is the podium okay?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Is that? And the room is mic'd, so you feel free to speak.
Okay, perfect. And first one, express my appreciation for the invitation to come speak today. My name is Brian Reed, or I lead regulatory affairs for SCAI. We're an insurance tech firm based in San Francisco. I'm personally based in Tampa, Florida. I came from the insurance industry, and I now lead regulatory affairs. So I'm going to be talking about one of our solutions. It's actually the first solution we brought to the market. It's called Z-Fire. So, yet another wildfire risk model. No, that's probably what you're saying in your head. I promise this will be worth your time because this is a product that has served the Arizona market for several years now. Since 2021, we're used very, very heavily of over 1,000 transactions per day. And we're allowing insurers to better assess wildfire risk on both the location and the property specific levels. Because we all know it's not all about the location, it's also about properties and how they interact with their environment around them. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But it's not only these insights that we've delivered to insurers, we also have developed a completely transparent risk scoring system that allows insurers to communicate to homeowners what are the top drivers of their risk score. Is there anything they can possibly do to bring their score down, to improve their insurability, to reduce their premiums? So our risk scores fully recognize and award mitigation. So we'll be talking about, why that's important. So if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to briefly talk about who we are. So Zesty AI is an information company. We know carriers thrive on better information, but the problem with information and data that is useful is a lot of it is locked. It's locked in unstructured data sources. Take aerial imagery, for example. Aerial imagery has so many insights that we can glean, such as defensible space, roof materials, etc. And for so long, carriers haven't been able to tap into this information because there hasn't been the technology to extract it. So now we have lots and lots of data points that we can extract, and we've actually been able to extract over 200 billion individual data points for properties across the entire continental U.S. From all these various data sources. If you can advance it one more time. So what do we do with these insights? Well, we can pass them off to the insurer to use in their rating, in their underwriting decisions. We're able to create a digital replica of every roof using oblique imagery and top-down imagery. So to create a digital representation. So a lot of information about the roofs themselves, as well as additional information about the property of the parcel. Some of these interact with regulations. So in California, they're safer from wildfires. We actually developed a way to pre-fill all 12 of the required mitigation factors using various data sources, including imagery. So carriers today are now using that to automatically recognize and award mitigation without having to ask the customer if they complete those actions. And then what we also do, and what I'm going to be talking about specifically today, is our peril-specific model. So we can take these individual insights and use machine learning techniques to figure out how do they all interact together to understand a holistic view of that property's risk. So how does an insurer use this? If you can advance the slide one more time. Generally, a few main use cases, eligibility and underwriting. So you often think about underwriting and eligibility, and it's kind of a red flag for a lot of people because you kind of think of what happened in California, where broad areas of the state were ineligible. And this is happening today. Carriers withdrawing from regions because they're high risk, people ending up at the fair claim. What our model is able to do is because it is so specific, it's so granular to that property, that even in a high risk area, carriers are able to figure out which properties are going to be better mitigated. And what that has allowed carriers to do, and Arizona is no exception to this, carriers have been able to open up the risk appetite in some of these high risk areas that are prone to wildfire. That's super, super important for fostering a healthy insurance market because we want to attract more carriers to be offering coverage in your state and in your high-risk areas. So one carrier actually shared with us in Arizona, they're able to open up their aperture of what types of risks they're able to accept because they know not all risks are equal, even if they're both within a high-risk area. They're also using this for rating decisions and determining the final premium. So this is what we do. We do this all in a very transparent method. I mentioned that before. Transparency and compliance, these are two of our main cornerstones. So what we do is with each risk score that we share with the carrier the top 3 drivers of that risk score. So the carrier can then embed that information in a customer-facing document. If somebody calls into the carrier and asks about the risk score, they have the information right at their fingertips to share what they can do to potentially lower their score. So transparency is very important to us. I'll be talking a bit about that later in this presentation. If you could advance the slide one more time. I'm not going to belabor the point. Wildfires definitely getting more severe, more frequent. 35% annualized growth in the insured losses over the past 10 years, and 2025 definitely in front of everybody's minds with 40 billion estimated, potentially exceeding that. So when carriers are seeing natural disasters happen, they tend to get in defensive mode. And I came from a carrier, so I can speak to this fact that this is front of mind now. So carriers are starting to get defensive. So what do? They need to use tools. But the problem is, and if you advance the next slide, there has been a big problem with some of the wildfire tools that have been in the market. If you go one more time, historically, carriers have had to use broad brush wildfire models that identify entire portions of the state as high risk. So in California specifically, that led to blanket rate increases, non-renewals, withdrawals from the market. And this map shows one example of one of these historic tools. If you advance the slide one more time, and I'm going to look back at the Tubbs fire. I think it's the 3rd time Tubbs has actually come up today. You can see that there have been many losses in the Tubbs fire within that footprint. So if you kind of just look within the footprint, it looks like it's doing a great job. But if you advance the slide one more time, the problem is so many losses were occurring outside of those areas. So that's 2 problems now that you have to face. So, the first problem is you have a broad brush model that's saying every home in this area is high risk. We know that's not necessarily the case. You see, I'm sure you've all seen aerial images of a wildfire, and then miraculously this home or that home survived and everything else is burned to the ground. So we know that's not necessarily the case, that everything's high risk. And the second problem is it just was not hitting the market. It was not a predictive model. So this is something that STAI set out to change in about 2019. So if you advance the slide one more time, and then once again, see if this plays for me. So to tackle the challenge of predicting wildfire risk, we undertook this massive data project. So what we did is we analyzed the footprint of over 1,000 recent U.S. wildfires. We got satellite imagery from before and after the event and identified which homes survived and which ones didn't, and which characteristics each of them had. So that work became the underpinnings and the foundation of Z-Fire. So Z-Fire is our wildfire risk model. It goes beyond just location. It captures what makes each property truly unique. And then by applying those machine learning techniques, Z-Fire learns to predict where wildfires are likely to occur, but also how likely is it that a specific home, based on its specific mitigation, how likely is that home to survive that wildfire? And then that, of course, is translated into what in the homeowner view to lower the risk. So if you go to the next slide, the result of this, one more time. There we go. We have what we believe is the world's largest wildfire database, 1,500 individual wildfire events. We only looked at events over, about 300 or 400 acres, spanning about 2 decades of events within North America. So this is how we built Z-Fire. If you advance the slide one more time and then once again. So let's talk a bit about what the carrier receives when they get a Z-Fire score. So like I said, it's not about the location only, it's also about the home itself. So that's why we decided to produce two distinct risk scores. So you have what we call the neighborhood score, as well as the property score. Each is a score of 1 through 10. The neighborhood score is indicative of how likely a property is going to be involved in a future wildfire perimeter. So I'm not saying anything about the damage rates, just how likely is it to be involved. Whereas the property level score now looks at the property specific features and determines how likely, if there was a wildfire to occur, is that home to be destroyed. So all of these scores, of course, come with the top 3 modifiers. So we're able to deliver that information directly to the insurer on what is driving their risk score. If we go to the next slide, and we partner very closely with IDHS as well. And we all know that defensible space is key. So that is why defensible space, both in a 0 to 30 foot as well as a 30 to 100 foot zone, are key features into our model. So by using a very recent aerial image, and we have providers that fly, between 1 and 4 times per year, we're first able to get a very recent, crisp, high resolution aerial image. And then our computer vision model identifies where the parcel outline is, where the building outline is, and then is able to identify how much vegetation is covering each one of these defensible zones. All of this is done with just a property address, and it's delivered to the carrier in usually under 3 seconds. So this is scalable. Carriers are using this 1,000 times a day in Arizona to assess risk at the point of sale without the need for a costly physical inspection. Next slide, please. And because we use high resolution imagery, we're able to get a truly property specific view of defensible space. It's not regional level, it's not neighborhood level. We're really looking truly at the parcel level. So for comparison, traditional models, as you see on the left, have used low resolution imagery. You can't get to the property level. So what does that mean? They tend to generalize. And the result is much less predictive power. So Milliman undertook a study and compared our model with a different solution on the market, found that it was 44 times more predictive on wildfire than the incumbent solutions. So how can an insurer take this information and translate it into eligibility and in rating? If you go to the next slide, I actually went before this and derived the scores for all of Arizona properties. So this is all of Arizona residential. The chart on the left shows you the distribution. So you can see the good news is our model actually identifies 85% of Arizona properties, residential properties, are falling within the very low or the low risk category. So it's really not as pronounced of a problem as it is in California, because you can see on the right, your probability of being involved in the wildfire exponentially increases. So a 10 is about a little more than 1 in 100 likelihood of being involved in a wildfire in any given year. So very high probability. Go to the next slide. Let's look at the property level score. So again, we looked at every single residential property and we derived the level 2 property level score. So this is where you see more of a normal or an even distribution. So while, yeah, there are a lot of properties that score in the low risk, you see that there are definitely more properties that are not as well mitigated in Arizona. So that's the 5 through 10s. So a fair number in the state. And this is problematic because once you look at the damage potential, there is definitely that exponential increase that you see. So for reference, a score of 10 is almost 100%. You're at about an 84% chance that if that home, if you're a score of 10, and you were involved in the wildfire, you have about an 84% chance that that home is going to burn. So compare that with a score of 7, still considered high risk, but that's only 36% chance. So some small measures can actually bring your score down from 10 to a 7. It might look high, but you're actually making drastic reductions. all the way down to a 1 where you're at almost a 0% chance of being destroyed. If you can go to the next slide, where it all comes together is you can take our 10 level 1 scores and our 10 level 2 scores and cross them. So now you have 100 granular risk segments. Level 1 score is hyper-specific to the neighborhood. The level 2 score is specific to each parcel and property. And once you kind of look at both of these holistically, you can kind of see how a carrier might use this to make better decisions that are good for the homeowners as well. So take a level 1 score of 7, for example. So 7, that's considered pretty high risk. So traditionally, if a carrier was just using a neighborhood or a regional level score, they might choose not to offer insurance to you. They might charge you a very high premium. But what happens if you're very, very well mitigated? What if you have that great defensible space? Shouldn't you deserve to be treated differently than somebody that maybe doesn't have as good mitigation on their property as you? So if you look at level 1 score of 7 with a low level 2 score, so that means they're very well mitigated. Level 2 is capturing that there's property specific mitigation happening. They might actually receive a moderate rating, whereas a level 2 score of maybe 8, 9, or 10, they're going to receive, that different treatment. Maybe it's a higher premium, but in this case, at least the carrier is able to reward those customers that are taking mitigating measures, and reward them in terms of better availability and better coverage and lower premiums. But they're also able to open up their appetite. So rather than saying all of this region is high risk, I don't want to take any of it, they might be willing to take maybe 25, maybe 50% of the homes. So if we can go to the next slide. We've actually filed our model across the entire Western US, and you can see we have approvals, including in California and Arizona, from the Z-Fire product, across every state where wildfires burn. So this is something that's very important to us. We file our models directly with departments of insurance. This is actually a new strategy of ours, where we will go directly to a department, provide all of our documentation, allow them to ask questions. So when a carrier wants to adopt it for their use case, the model's pre-approved, pre-vetted, and it makes for a lot cleaner of a process when it comes time for that carrier to adopt. If you could advance the slide one more time. And in Arizona, as I mentioned, we're used over 1,000 times per day at the moment, and this is expanding rapidly. So we have I believe about 10 minutes left. I want to talk more about transparency and mitigation. I know that's the key focus of this group. So we didn't just build a highly predictive solution. And to be doing so, I would argue, would only be fighting half the battle, because what we put together is vital information that can be used to make our homes and our communities safer. So I'm going to talk a bit about what we're doing to deliver transparency. Go 2 slides ahead. So Z-Fire, it delivers vitally important information directly to insurers and directly to homeowners. So first of all, score transparency. I already talked about the drivers of the risk score, which is delivered directly to the insurers. And in California, we will provide additional information to carriers on how the score works, so they can share that with customers. Mitigation is huge. So there's a number of ways that mitigation gets captured. Because we use high frequency, high resolution imagery, we can get a new aerial imagery on a house up to 4 times per year, on average about 2 times per year. So what that means is if a carrier is refreshing their scores, they're automatically going to capture any kind of mitigation that's happening by the time the customer renews. So if they're using Z-Fire for rating, they're going to be able to offer a lower rate at renewal. Or if a customer comes and says, I don't believe your score is correct, I believe something's incorrect. Maybe there's a rare glitch and something was captured incorrectly. Or maybe the customer says, this image, this was 6 months ago, but 3 months ago, I cleared all my vegetation. So what does a carrier do in that case? We built out what we call the appeals process. So this was very important for California, but it is becoming very popular outside of that state as well. So what a customer can do is interact with their carrier. They can call up their carrier and say, hey, is there anything I can do to lower my score? And the carrier actually has a tool that we call the appeals feature, where they can simulate different mitigation actions that the customer might be able to take. So for example, if they see 50% vegetation coverage, what if you clear that to 25%? What would that do? And by doing this back and forth process, they can scenario plan and help the customer decide, is there anything in their power that's worth doing before they tell them to spend $1,500 to clear their property and find it doesn't have an impact on their score. So it's that initial scenario planning tool that we built out that's becoming very, very popular outside of California. We're releasing it everywhere, but allowing customers to understand what is in my power to lower my score, which is very, very important. And then, of course, it's all delivered in a format that is easily digestible by the carrier. It can be embedded into a customer letter in an automated format, so that these insights can be shared automatically without much resource needed by the carrier. Next slide, please. So here's an example of mitigation that was captured by our aerial imagery. So you can see on the top, this property was scoring a level 2 score of 8, and you can clearly see there's a lot of overhanging vegetation, some additional vegetation in the parcel surrounding it. So it was scoring very high on the level 2 score. But on the, couple of years later, that homeowner completed some mitigation. They thinned out their vegetation. They didn't do complete clearance because everyone thinks you have to do complete clearance. They did, some clearance of some of those trees that were right up next to the roof line. And you can see that brought their level 2 score down from an 8 to a 5. So that would actually translate to a very substantial savings on their wildfire premium. So this is done automatically, or if that customer could have called in, done the scenario planning, and that could have been overridden manually. Next slide, please. And outside of Z-Fire, we also have another product called Mitigation Prefill, and this was built after the California regulations. So we've also, been able to develop a system to use other data sources, which will prefill all 12 of the required mitigation discounts that California now requires carriers to offer to homeowners. So what this means is there's no need for a costly inspection. There's no need for relying on customer information or agent information. Mitigation can be passed on to the homeowner automatically and at the time of sale in just a matter of about 2 or 3 seconds. So this is another solution that was built out for California. We're seeing a lot of demand for it in other states as well. So we are going to be releasing it everywhere. And next slide, I'm going to wrap up really quickly and one more. So you can see our model is highly predictive in Arizona. We actually back tested it everywhere. So I looked at 57 different wildfires, including some of the largest in Arizona history. And we looked at how our model predicted both on the neighborhood level as well as the property level. You can see that clearly, lots of homes in very low category, not so many in the high and very high. But the inclusion rate, so the rate that home was included within that perimeter, definitely skyrockets with a high and very high. So that sloping suggests that the model is doing what it's supposed to do. It's very predictive. Actually 12,000, almost 13,000 times more likely and very high to be included than in the very low category. So very granular way to assess that risk. Of course, the level 2 score is definitely the differentiator here. And homes that we identified as very high on the property level risk were 3 times as likely to be destroyed as homes that we identified to be very low risk. Next slide. And I just have a couple more examples here to show. So this is a more recent fire. So the Williams fire, a couple examples and 2 different results here. So you can see this home on the left had a relatively high level 2 score, 7 out of 10. That's considered very high risk. And you can clearly see why, just the sheer amount of vegetation surrounding its property. And unfortunately, it did not end well for this homeowner, and this home was lost. But if you go to the next slide, you can see a different type of situation. So same fire, same relative risk level in the area. But this home scored a 3 out of 10. You can see the top drivers of that was the very low amount of education. So this is actually information that the carrier would have received. A very low of education, and clearly it made a difference. You can see definitely some scorching on the ground, but the building itself survived. And it's clear that the mitigation and the defensible space helped with that. So I'm going to wrap this up with the last slide here. So where does it all come together? I mean, I believe Zesty AI, as well as, you know, the Arizona Department of Insurance, we share the same vision. We both want a healthier insurance market. We want to improve transparency for customers. We want to help show where does mitigation make a difference. So how does this all foster a healthier insurance market? It starts with that precision. So the risk-based precision, so carriers can write with confidence. And like I mentioned, one carrier actually shared with us in Arizona today, they are writing more properties than they would have if they had older or outdated models. We also want to build a safer and healthier market. And Z-Fire is helping to advance this with the learnings that we were able to derive with our partnership with IDHS on what resiliency and mitigation measures actually do make a difference. So all of this, really fosters carriers having confidence and being able to come into the state, to stay in the state, and to have, high quality insurance and high quality coverage for all Arizonans. So this is something that is true, very core to our vision. And I hope that we can continue discussions on how Zesty AI and in Arizona can partner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And I apologize for the rushed
No
presentation.
problem at all.
But I think it speaks for everybody that that's a lot of good information too, and your slides, of course, will be available as well. I know we're running late, but I wanted to open it up. I know we have questions here sometimes. If you have anything, no. Anyone online, any of our council members online? No,
Sorry, there were no public requests.
and no public.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much to our presenters online and in person, and those of you who have joined us remotely and in person. Thank you very much. This meeting's adjourned.
Past models, how much of this, radio show, media impact was